I would not support the Republican Party. There's no chance I would support the Republican Party. I'm not going to support the Democratic Party. I don't know what I'm going to do.
You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so there's been some buzz lately about the fact that Tucker Carlson came out on this random podcast that he did and said that he is no longer going to vote for Republicans. Of course I can't vote for them. So it's a pretty strong statement coming from him. I think that it's pretty safe timing for that. So I'll get into all that. And also Tim Dillon had some strong comments kind of amounting to the same thing, although Tim Dillon has been distancing himself from MAGA for a while, never really considered himself a part of the Republican brand necessarily, but is firmly in that sort of right-wing populist camp, talking about immigration and definitely willing to go with the narratives about minorities, etc., instead of a more structural critique. Kind of a faux structural critique coming from this guy. And that's how he's gotten himself in the position of constantly having to explain what's going on in the heads of MAGA, even though he doesn't really understand it anymore. He doesn't understand what these people are doing or why, even though for a lot of us it seems pretty in line with what we've seen from them before. It's just maniacal incompetence. I think that sums it up pretty nicely. So here is Tim Dillon talking about the UFC fight on the lawn of the White House and how that possibly signifies the end of MAGA.
The MAGA movement, the party that Donald Trump threw when he walked down the escalator, is ending. And I think it ended with that UFC fight. I think that was the last party MAGA was going to throw. You had motocross, you had UFC fights. That was a fun party, but it's the final. I think it's the final party. I think in the same way that Imagine video during COVID, Hollywood didn't know it then, but that was the end of them. Like, that was the finale of Hollywood. They didn't know. They thought they were making a video trying to, I don't know what the hell they were trying to get people to do, stay in their house or shut their mouths or whatever. UFC on the White House lawn. And then one guy comes out and goes, Michelle Obama's a man. Could it get better than that for these people? This was the finale. This is the penultimate conclusion of MAGA. It's a UFC fight on a White House lawn with motocross, and then one of the fighters goes, by the way, do you want to say anything? And he goes, Michelle Obama's a man. And that is the finale. But they don't know it yet. Here's the thing. They don't know it yet. In the same way that when Hollywood did that Imagine video, they had no idea that they were on their way to being like irrelevant and hated.
Yeah, so he's using this metaphor of comparing it to the Imagine video that the celebrities did in 2020, which was cringe, which he says signified the end of Hollywood. Comparing that to the end of the MAGA movement. Tim Dillon seems pretty zooted in this particular episode, stumbling on his words a lot, and he's gotten to the point where I think he's pretty bored with a lot of this stuff. And his premises are pretty simple. He kind of just thinks of some metaphors to kind of stretch out and takes a satirical angle sometimes. Makes some really good observations, says things that other people on the right aren't willing to say sometimes. But usually is just kind of phoning it in, and that's part of his brand at this point. And he kind of has to give some props to the UFC thing because Rogan was such a prominent participant in that and really propped it up and is still propping it up, actively praising Trump and the UFC event, like really going hard, really sucking up. And Tim Dillon is the kind of guy, the kind of personality that can see that, surely, but doesn't feel like he's in a position to go that far with his criticism yet, although he pokes at it sometimes. And he did bring the Michelle Obama thing up, which Rogan hasn't mentioned yet, I don't believe. I could be wrong about that. But this was the moment where one of these fighters grabbed the microphone to say that, you know, Michelle Obama was a man and we all knew it. Just the kind of conspiracy slop that a lot of these racists and right-wingers have been swimming in for a long time. Tim Dillon is no stranger to that. I think that he finds it a little distasteful at the current moment, but he, you know, describing it as this like symbol of the end of MAGA, I get what he's going for. I think it's a little too hyperbolic, honestly. I think it's a little naive. The MAGA movement has outlived a lot, and it came and had a lot of momentum before people like this were caping for it. So they were certainly part of the new MAGA coalition, but it's not like that many people fell off supporting Trump from the first time, surprisingly. It's not like he had a whole new churn of support. So my point is that the base, I think the core base behind Trump is going to continue to be really palpable and possibly is going to shape the narrative more than they think it will. And right now they're doing a lot to shape the narrative around Israel and talking about how America's lost this war. And that's pretty unanimous among everybody, really. But even some of these guys like Tucker Carlson and Tim Dillon, they all seem to agree that we've lost, and it's just a matter of wrapping that up. So before I get to the Tucker Carlson thing, here is a clip of Tim Dillon talking about the war.
But Vance and other people have realized that will be the end of America. A ground invasion of Iran or a nuclear weapon will be the end of the United States of America. We will not survive that conflict. We won't. So we're out and we've got a deal. And a lot of people don't like the deal. And by the way, here's why I think it's actually a good deal. The points of the deal were dictated to J.D. Vance by God. That's why I'm comfortable with the deal. And that's in J.D. Vance's new book. God appeared to me in my room and gave me the Iran deal. Vance is coming out now. Trump is coming out going, listen, guys, we're done. We can't do this anymore. Israel's stunned by Trump's Iran deal. It's the New York Times. Sees it as a catastrophic capitulation. Israel wants boots on the ground. They want a nuke. They want a regional war. This is a bad idea for them. It's a terrible idea. And Republican senators in Congress are going to kick up dust about this too, because they're going to be pressured by their donors with whatever mechanism. Up to you to decide how they're being pressured, but they will be pressured to speak out against this, and they may try to impeach Trump over it, and it's leaking out that maybe when the Democrats get in, they'll impeach Trump and the Republicans will get on board because they're unhappy with the Iran deal. I don't believe that, but that is something that is potentially leaking out. Is there stats on this? Any of these betting sites, Polymarket or whatever, are there stats on if this thing holds? Because I think it's going to hold. My prediction is it's going to hold. I think it holds because I don't think we have a choice. It'll be the collapse of our country if it doesn't hold.
Yeah, so this stuff about the collapse of America, again, I think it's a little hyperbolic. You could certainly draw the dots together on that in terms of, possible scenarios. But he's saying that that's why somebody like J.D. Vance is saying we got to pull out of this because they know that America is going to fall if we continue this war with Iran. I think that that's a little bit more indicative of his mind swirling about this stuff. He's been really freaked out by the Trump administration's willingness to do this war effort when they knew that the Strait of Hormuz would be shut down and the entire world economy held hostage. And yeah, it just comes back to incompetence. I mean, they're just fucking dumb. So like the fundamental mistake here was ever thinking that these people were going to be good at governing. And when it comes to Tucker Carlson, supposedly not being a Republican anymore, you're really starting to see some breaks in terms of, am I a part of this coalition anymore? Yada, yada, yada. So I think they're doing that because there's so much time before the next election, at least several months. And then there's even more time before the next presidential election. They're kind of hedging their bets to see how bad it is in the midterms. And then Tim Dillon says this thing about how he's hearing that some Republicans are going to go along with impeachment if Democrats win back and, blah, blah, blah. That would be a scenario where Democrats are not like fully in control, maybe don't have enough in the Senate to put it over. Republicans would go along with it. I don't know who the fuck are we talking about? He even says that he doesn't believe it. I don't believe it either. I don't know why he's saying it or where he's heard that from. Yeah, I fully don't buy that. I could see momentum building in that direction for sure, but who are the Republicans that oppose this? They are not the ones who are upset about this. They may be upset about the way it's gone, but a lot of them are just upset about the fact that we're still not bombing them. Like they just want this to keep going, and they've been agitating for it for a long time. Those are the power voices in the Republican Party. So on that note, here is what Tucker Carlson had to say about the Republican Party and his support for it, or lack thereof.
You say that the president is under influence. What is the leverage, in your opinion, that you believe a foreign government may have on the president of the United States?
That is the question. I mean, I'm trying to incite curiosity on that question, try to get people to ask that question. Like, what is the answer? Joe Kent, who ran the National Terrorism Center, suggested it was threats, physical threats, and that the Butler assassination attempt in August of 2024 was not a lone gunman, and it was part of a conspiracy, and that Trump personally shut down that investigation because he knows who was behind it. I don't know if that's true or not, but you have very serious people with security clearances, with access to classified information, who are making that claim. So I think we need to get to the bottom of it. There's no effort to get to the bottom of it whatsoever. So I don't really know. Of course, there's massive donor pressure. Trump, what we know for certain is that the United States went to war with Iran, a war that we are losing, that we've effectively lost already, because of pressure from the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. So, like, that's enough. Knowing that is knowing that the U.S. government betrayed the United States. Like, there's no other way to read it.
In terms of a read from the American people, off if they feel the same way as you do, and maybe some of the others that have moved away from the Republican Party and moved away from President Trump because of the war and these issues, do you think that the midterms are going to be like the first chance for us to get a temperature read of how the American people are feeling towards Trump and some of these issues that you're talking about?
Well, the poll numbers now are, tell a pretty clear story about it. I would not support the Republican Party. There's no chance I would support the Republican Party. I'm not going to support the Democratic Party. I don't know what I'm going to do. But at this point, how could I or any American voter support a political party that's not loyal to the United States, that puts the interests of a foreign country above those of its own citizens? Like, that's it's not possible to vote for people like that, and I'm not going to. And I think I voted Republican my entire life. I worked at Fox News, CNN, right, MSNBC. I've been a consistent defender for 35 years of the Republican Party. I mean, very consistent defender. But there's no defending this because it's immoral, and it's exactly the opposite of what a political party in a democracy is charged with doing, which is representing its own voters, its own citizens, its own nation, and they're not doing that. So no, I'm out. And if I'm out, then I think a lot of other people are.
So there you have it. Tucker Carlson is announcing that he would not vote for Republicans. And people like Cenk Uygur are taking a victory lap over this because they predicted this or have been propping up Tucker Carlson for a while now and feel like this is a reward for that. So we'll see what happens in the midterms. I mean, this is pretty early out from there. This seems more to me like him sending a message to them because he said he's not going to vote for Democrats. And I mean, he is smart enough to know that if he was trying to signal that he is going to vote against Republicans, he would be saying that he would consider voting for a Democrat. So that's not what he's doing. And maybe it's for the best because it's a signal not to try to court him. But I think ideologically, these guys, him, Tim Dillon, they haven't changed their mind significantly. This is what I've been saying. And their narrative is pretty consistent. They're upset with the fact that Donald Trump is diverting their narrative or making it hard for them to justify what he's doing from their perspective. And it's also just become the most relevant set of issues for them to be on top of in order to be riding the crest of public interest. And so while public interest may be going in this anti-Israel direction, on the right, it's America first. On the left, it's human rights for Palestinians. But largely when it comes to worldview, with a guy like Tim Dillon, for example, you still hear him talking a lot about immigration and like how immigration is the biggest issue in the world right now. And it's clear that he feels that's going to continue to shape what people care about in politics. And Tucker Carlson is probably familiar enough with right-wing politics to think the same thing. So the fact that the narrative around that isn't changing, and they're, if anything, upset that Donald Trump isn't harsh enough on immigration. You hear from people like Nick Fuentes that he should just be indiscriminately grabbing up and deporting everybody that he can. To the extent that he already is doing that, it's not enough for the white supremacists like Nick Fuentes. So Tucker Carlson isn't saying that part out loud, but he doesn't have to because Nick Fuentes says it for him. And he brought Nick Fuentes into the fold. And Tucker Carlson is also continuing with this sort of white nationalist, white outrage type narrative to fuel what he's doing, and is being given the pass to do that by people like Cenk Uygur because he's now saying negative things about Trump. So that's great. And we're starting to see some signals that some people, even if it's just these podcasters, would consider throwing Trump under the bus with impeachment or supporting something like that, if it means, and this is important, that they get to move on to the next page in the Republican project. And so it seems like that's what Tucker Carlson has his eyes on, and is what Tim Dillon is referencing when he says some people are saying they're going to support impeachment. So that's the part where the support from the base is going to become the dominant factor again. Fox News consistently being in support of Trump, which has been the core of his propaganda outfit this entire time, even with all his conflict with them. They're still driving the narrative steadily ahead. And I don't think people view them as the establishment as much as they view like the other mainstream news outlets. Although I do think there's some of that sentiment on the right, there's not as much. So my point being that eventually it's very likely that these guys are just going to come back to a point where they have to decide if they're going to get back on the Trump train and make excuses for it again. It's going to come to a point that they really have to decide, are they willing to stake their career on trying to get Trump thrown under the bus? Because it's not going to be that easy of a thing to do. And I think that's why they're taking up this messaging now, especially Tucker. He's smart enough to know that he has to beat this drum for a while in order to get the base upset enough that it might actually change the dynamic going forward with Trump. I'm dubious about that. This is definitely more movement than we've ever seen from supporters of Trump, not rank and file on the ground supporters of Trump, but, you know, podcaster and messaging types. This is the most distance we've ever seen between them. But like I said, we're not right up next to an election yet. You know, we've got a few months before it's really crunch time. What they're saying when it comes down to actually affecting the balance of Congress and actually affecting the outcome of an election or an impeachment, that's what's going to really matter. And the pressure is going to be on in that moment. And the Trump base has been vicious historically with anybody who goes against him in that way. And you know, even the people who get praise for going against him, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie, you know, they've been hounded out of the Republican Party. And it's likely that that will happen more. That seems more likely to me than Trump being hounded out of the Republican Party. We've never seen anything even close to that.
So I think what our job is, and that goes for everybody who's listening to this, because I think I've curated this audience enough that even if you're a Tim Dillon fan or something like that, you still probably don't want full-on fascism in America. Maybe there's a couple of you that are hate watching. But if you don't want that, what we have to do is to exploit the failures of Trump in order to sabotage the continuation of the fascist movement that will come after him. What these guys are signaling is that they want to continue the project without Trump. They want to lay the groundwork for this project to be continued without Trump, so that when Trump is inevitably gone somehow or some way, their movement doesn't go along with it. The right-wing narrative and populist movement does not go along with it. So it's our job as much as possible to make sure that those things are always tied together. And in my opinion, people who are reversing course on Trump, if they want to help to get him impeached, that's fine. But they shouldn't be brought into the fold messaging-wise unless there are serious capitulations on the worldview that led them to Trump. Because then that is when we can use them and work with them to build a better political project. But if they're still talking about white supremacist narratives and not letting go of those impulses that led them to cape for Trump in the first place, then they're really just looking for the next person that they can do that with. And so we have to tie that person to Trump, whoever it may be.